Everybody, welcome back to a Max Velocity weather forecast, and today what we're going over is that severe weather potential for both today, tomorrow, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday across the United States. There is a lot of shots of severe weather this week, and even going into next week. We'll get to the latest on the timing, the details, intensity of the storms. Everything that you need to know ahead of the storms will be in this forecast. Before we get too far into this, make sure you're subscribed. Over 80% of you that watch these forecasts are not subscribed, so hit that subscribe button real quick. Let's get right into it. So as of right now, there is a slight risk of severe weather that does include southern Nebraska going to northwestern Kansas and northeastern Colorado. The main threats today will be damaging winds, large to even potentially a little bit of very large hail, and as well as a potential for maybe an isolated tornado. There's a very low chance that we see a briefer weak tornado or two in this area, just due to the fact we have a little bit more of a low-level shear component in these areas later this afternoon. And again, a marginal risk of severe weather extends through the Midwest, and as well as even going into the northern plains. You can see there's a slight risk of severe weather for those up in Montana, and as well as northeastern Wyoming and western portions of South Dakota. Going over closer to the East Coast and even into the Ohio Valley, there's another slight risk of severe weather for those locations, including all basically the main threats being damaging winds and large hail. Not much of a tornado threat over that direction, really, with how the setup is out that way. Here's a look at the timing for Colorado this afternoon, and again, we'll go through all the states in this forecast. 3 to 4 o'clock this afternoon, we'll start to see some showers and storms starting to develop near the interstate just east of Denver. By 5 to 6 o'clock, and again, this is in mountain time, storms will be moving off to the east and northeast, going towards areas like Sterling, a bit more of a rural area there in Colorado. Eventually, by 7 to 8 o'clock, most of the storm activity moving towards areas like Nebraska and as well as Kansas. Here's a look at the timing over those ways, so you can see closer to areas like Kansas. By 4 to 5 o'clock, we'll start to see some storms bubbling up, but really across from Dodge City up to Hays and Garden City. By 5 to 6 o'clock, more storm activity ongoing and starting to develop. Again, that really is just to the south of the interstate, south of Hays primarily, and off to the southwest of Salina. Eventually by 8 to 9 o'clock, that storm activity not going to be nearly as long-lived due to the fact it's just going to it's not really set up really well in terms of having it being a long duration event. Most of it will end by daylight heating expiring. By 10 to 11 o'clock, though, we'll start to see a line of storms coming out of areas of Colorado. This will eventually go into northwestern Kansas as well as southwestern Nebraska, posing that threat again for damaging winds and even large hail. I cannot rule out, again, an isolated brief tornado, but the threat overall is very low. Damaging winds still being the main threat overall everywhere today in those risk areas. By 12 to 1 o'clock, storms going through again Colby and as well as McCook. By 2 to 3 in the morning, storms are going to start to weaken as they move off to the east and northeast. Eventually by 6 to 7 in the morning tomorrow, storms going through Hastings, and eventually will start to dry out heading into the late morning, early afternoon on Thursday. Storms will then be possible in Kansas heading into later Thursday. Again, I'll have more on that in just a second. Here's a look at the timing across the Midwest. Again, this is a large scale radar. Again, minus about 6 from this to get your hour in CST or EST time. So eventually by 6 to 7 o'clock, storms ongoing close to areas like northern Missouri. Eventually by 8 to 9, closer to 10 o'clock, storms going into areas like central and southern portions of Illinois. Those storms, again, going to pose mainly just a damaging wind threat, and eventually going into the overnight hours, we'll start to see those storms going through southern Indiana and another cluster of storms over in in Iowa. And those storms will pose that threat again for maybe some damaging wind gusts, but overall, a lot of lightning is going to be the main threats in those areas. Eventually heading into the overnight hours, early tomorrow morning, we'll start to see those storms cross over into areas like Illinois, posing the main threat for maybe some damaging wind gusts. That's about it for those areas. Here's a look at the timing for Ohio heading into later this afternoon. We'll start to see areas of storms developing near Dayton as well as Troy, eventually heading towards Columbus. These storms will have that potential for some damaging winds and also some large hail. That will head off to the east and east-southeast, going towards Lancaster by about 5 o'clock this afternoon, eventually heading to closer to 6, 7 o'clock, going through Parkersburg and as well as going into West Virginia, and eventually Ohio will clear out for the most part going into later Wednesday, basically just after sunset. Here's a look at the timing across the Carolinas, really anywhere on the East Coast later this afternoon. You can see 5 to 6 o'clock. Your typical summertime storms developing. Most of these usually produce that threat for maybe some damaging winds up to 60 miles per hour, and as well as some quarter-sized hail. Overall, the threat, though, is going to be fairly low. Again, it's a slight risk of severe weather, so widely scattered severe weather is possible, but overall, we're not going to see anything too widespread like we saw yesterday. But by 6 to 7 o'clock, storms moving through again off to the northwest on the northwest side of your screen. See closer to areas like Charleston and as well as northeastern Kentucky. We'll start to see a bit of a cluster of storms moving down to the southeast, producing that main threat again for some damaging winds. A bit more of a scattered activity ongoing there in southern Virginia by later this afternoon into the early evening hours, and a bit more, again, more of a numerous area of storms across western Carolinas and as well as even going to eastern Tennessee. Eventually by 9 to 10 o'clock, storms will start to kind of fizzle out because of, again, daylight heating ending. Eventually by about 11 to 12 o'clock, o'clock, a area of storms will move through western Virginia, so maybe Roanoke and Harrisonburg, but those storms will likely weaken after midnight, not really posing much in terms of severe weather after midnight tonight. So after that, basically, we'll start to clear out, and going into Thursday morning, it'll be a little bit drier for those locations. Quick look at tomorrow's severe weather outlook. I'll have more details on this for you tomorrow, but there is a slight risk of severe weather across Montana, and there's also a marginal risk that extends through the Dakotas, and even going into Kansas. You can see that this actually goes into even the far northern Texas Panhandle. This is the first time we've had a severe weather potential in the Texas Panhandle in a few weeks, so this is going to be the first time we've had anything, but it's a fairly low-end risk, obviously. Only maybe some damaging winds or quarter-size hail possible in those storms, and eventually going out into the eastern, or really the east coast, and as well as even the Ohio Valley, we're going to see another slight risk of severe weather, fairly similar again to what we saw yesterday, and maybe even today. We'll have a pretty similar risk again tomorrow, going through the Carolinas and even portions of Georgia. So those near Atlanta will have a chance for maybe a little bit of severe weather as well going into tomorrow. Here's a little quick look at tomorrow's severe weather potentially. So you can see going to the overnight hours, we'll start to see maybe some showers and storms developing, really just a little cluster, really anywhere from, again, the Oklahoma Panhandle even, so really anywhere in northwestern Oklahoma has a chance for some storms developing, going back toward Wichita and up closer to Kansas City going to the overnight hours. Eventually by 3 to 4 o'clock, storms really not going to be that potent. I mean, they're going to only last a few hours, and again, the main threats with these will be maybe some large hail. That's about it. I don't expect too much in terms of damaging winds. Hail, though, could reach as high as golf ball size, so just keep that in mind. Here's a look at the timing overall, or closer to the areas like the Carolinas as well as Virginia. So about 3 to 4 o'clock this tomorrow afternoon, we'll start to see some showers and storms developing, again, closer to Harrisonburg. Whole area of storms from Greenville down to Greensboro, and as well as Hickory as well. By 5 to 6 o'clock, storms all moving again off to the east and east-southeast, and a lot of these, again, going to be wide, or really numerous, probably scattered to numerous, depending on where you're at. Eventually by 9 to 10 o'clock, those storms will start to move closer to eastern North Carolina, and eventually shift off the coastline going into the overnight hours. And again, severe weather will probably taper down after about 12 o'clock or so. So again, most of the severe weather components over the next few days will, for the most part, be during the late afternoon or evening hours, a few exceptions with the overnight threat, but that will, again, be fairly minimal overall for most locations. Here's a look at the severe weather potential heading into Friday. There is another slight risk of severe weather again across Montana, going into the Dakotas as well. Fairly similar overall for the last several days. We're having another marginal risk of severe weather for those in the Carolinas. Again, very typical for this time of year for those locations, as well as another slight risk for severe weather heading into Saturday. And this will start to be a slight increase in maybe a tornado threat heading into maybe even Saturday and even Sunday. You can see a slight risk of severe weather existing for North Dakota, western Minnesota, as well as eastern Montana. And eventually heading into Sunday, this is when the tornado threat may increase a little bit. We will see a potential for maybe a few tornadoes in those in Minnesota, as well as western Wisconsin and the Dakotas. Again, a little bit more of a low-level jet developing there, and we'll have a bit of a pattern change heading into maybe Sunday. But overall, a damaging wind threat seems to be the main threat really over the next 5 days. So you can see this is the timing going into late Saturday, so you can start to see some showers and storms heading through areas like North Dakota. Heading to the overnight hours, we might have a line of storms going into areas like Minnesota. Eventually going into Sunday, storms will go in areas like Minnesota, and again, the potential for maybe even a few tornadoes may exist, so just keep that in mind for those in Minnesota heading into Sunday. But then going into Monday, more storm activity shifting off to the east as that trough also shifts off to the east. And this is a look at the jet stream, by the way, so you can kind of see a little dip in the jet stream heading into early next week. That will eventually bring not just cool down to those in the Midwest, but it'll also bring maybe some storm activity to those locations as well. And eventually going to Wednesday and Thursday, maybe even another dip in the jet stream might bring more shower and storm activity to New England, and even the potential for maybe a very isolated severe weather event. And another trough going to start developing back out in Canada. That might end up bringing some more severe weather to us later next week, so just keep that in mind. Here's a look, by the way, real quick at the temperatures. You can kind of see this is what we're going to see over the next several days. Reds indicating above average temperatures, blues are usually below average, and again, that trough will dip down into New England as well as the Midwest. Cooler temperatures will arrive for those locations. Unfortunately, a ridge will continue to dominate really the southern plains, which will keep our air hot across those locations. You eventually see, again, a bit of a cool down across the Ohio Valley and as well as the East Coast. But again, back out in the central plains, we're not going to really see much in terms of cool down until maybe next week. And even in the southern plains like Texas and Oklahoma, not much in terms of a cool down expected going to early next week. There will be a weak cold front, but overall the severity or really any cool down with that is going to be fairly minimal. And again, heading into later next week, might be having a bit of a cool down for those in the Midwest, but overall, it's going to be a fairly minimal cool down. And just a quick look at the tropics, by the way, we're not going to really see much in terms of the tropical activity over the next several days. There is a lot of shear in the atmosphere, really a lot of shear in general across all of the Atlantic Ocean, so we're really not going to see much in terms of tropical activity, but it might start to ramp up heading in a little bit later in this month. All right, make sure to stay updated again with Max Velocity here on our YouTube page for the latest. Make sure to hit the like button down below and subscribe if you enjoy this forecast. This forecast is brought to you by Platinum Contracting and All Dense Repair.